The How to Train Your Dragon trilogy is one of the most beloved animated trilogies of all time. With the release of the live-action adaptation of the first movie, it's time to look back at the animated trilogy that inspired it all. Do all three films hold up as excellent animated movies, or are some of them significantly better than others? I'm going to structure this video by talking about each one of the three movies individually, and then I'll wrap up the video by ranking the three of the trilogy. So let's travel back in time to 2010 and look at How to Train Your Dragon 1. With the whole trilogy complete, it's clear that each movie represents a specific chapter of what it means to grow up. As Manning Movie Frank said in his video on How to Train Your Dragon, Movie 1 is about finding yourself, Movie 2 is about growing up, and Movie 3 is about letting go. As much as we may love these movies, it's important to remember that they are kids' movies, and that's okay. A good kids' movie sends important lessons towards children as they struggle to find their place in the world. Now, the best kids movies do that, as well as sending messages to the parents taking their kids to the theater. And How to Train Your Dragon 1 absolutely does that. Hiccup is the outcast of Berk. When we think of Vikings, we think of the strong, somewhat ancient warriors who fought and killed dragons. There is no better representative of that than the chief of Berk, Stoic. But of course, we have our main character, Hiccup. He is the underdog of the story, a boy who doesn't fit in one bit into this Viking culture. His arms are thinner than pencils, everyone sees him as a burden to the tribe, his father is quite embarrassed he's his son, he doesn't get along with the other kids his age. There's no better word used to describe Hiccup than as an outcast. Once we grow up, if we're lucky enough, we learn to own what makes us different. We're all different, and owning those differences is what can bring us joy. But if you're a teenage boy or girl, there is nothing you want more than to just fit in, and that's what Hiccup wants. In the first act, we see Hiccup tries best to be like the other kids and to impress his father. He just wants to fight like a Viking too. He just does it in different ways. He wants to impress his father, but his father is ashamed of what Hiccup represents. So eventually Hiccup accidentally shoots down a Night Fury, the supposed most dangerous dragon of them all. If Hiccup can kill this dragon, he will become the most popular Viking of them all. But when the time comes, he just can't do it. We may see Hiccup as an incompetent goofball, one that's weak and constantly outshined by others, but that's not true. It could have been very easy to make Hiccup some bumbling coward and use those traits as a means to relate to the audience. But Hiccup is not that. He is competent. It's just his strengths are not what Vikings typically associate as strengths. The entire second act of the movie shows us that Hiccup isn't physically strong, but he's smart, he's empathetic, he's creative, and he has a way with people and dragons. The second act is a constant back and forth between Hiccup's time with Toothless and his time training with the other kids. The structure of these scenes is so brilliant. As we alternate from scene to scene, we see that Hiccup learns something from one scene and applies it to the next. By spending the time learning dragons with Toothless and all their little quirks, he is able to excel in his dragon training in a way no other student is able to. Instead of learning how to fight dragons, he learns to understand them. After the training scenes, he will take what he learns there and apply it to Toothless. Hiccup was told that a downed dragon is a dead dragon. Hearing this inspires Hiccup to create the tail wing for Toothless so he can fly again. At the end of the movie, Hiccup and Toothless are able to beat the Queen Dragon not because Hiccup is strong or because Toothless is the fastest dragon, but because Hiccup outsmarted the Queen Dragon. Hiccup remembered earlier in the film that dragons aren't fireproof on the inside. Remembering this smaller detail allowed Hiccup to defeat that Queen Dragon. Even until the climax of the movie, How to Train Your Dragon reinforced Hiccup's strengths, and that's how the Vikings were able to win in the end. Showing competence is such an underrated part of character development. You can create the most unlikable character, but if they are competent at what they do, the viewer can still be drawn to them. Now, of course, you don't want a character without flaws, you just want them to be really good at one or a few specific things. Hiccup's ability to learn and apply what he learns is what makes him competent. His ability to come up with specific ideas for solutions is what makes him competent. This is why we are invested in Hiccup. Not because he's a kind boy and not just because he's the underdog, but because watching him apply what he learns and as a result changing the world around him is the core of what makes him a captivating character. The other brilliance of the structure of this movie is how it allows us to learn about the dragons of this world. Yes, dragons are pretty much something that every person knows, but in each of these movies or shows, they're different. How to Train Your Dragon is no exception. Yes, these scenes with Toothless allow us to see Hiccup's strengths, but it also allows us to learn about dragons at the same time our main character does. Yes, he takes a look at the books to see what has been said about each dragon, but that book doesn't really teach us anything about the dragons. It just says here's what they look like and how dangerous they are. Hiccup's time with Toothless is what truly allows us to learn about these dragons. Learning this at the same time the main character does is so important to the story because we are put in Hiccup's shoes. The structure of this movie allows us to better understand the character, and that is so important in a movie like this. The last point I want to make about this second act is its ability to build tension. It's not until the reveal of the Queen Dragon 2/3 through the movie where the stakes are established. There is a big dragon that needs to be stopped, and that is why all the other dragons attack Burke. Usually it would be a bad thing to introduce the main thread of your story so late into said story, but what How to Train Your Dragon is able to do is create tension away from the threat of a villain. As we cut back and forth between the training scenes and the Toothless scenes, yes, we learn more about Hiccup and the dragons, but we also know that what Hiccup is doing isn't allowed. That's why he's hiding in the forest while he trains Toothless. As Hiccup becomes better at taming the dragons and as he actually gets closer with Toothless, we know at some point this is all going to blow up. We know people are going to wonder how he's getting so good at taming dragons, and we know at some point he's going to be asked to kill a dragon. Our fear of how Stoic or Astrid or the rest of the Vikings will react is what drives most of the tension in the story, and that tension pays off during Hiccup's test. And despite that tension being released, more tension is built once we know the Vikings are leading themselves into a slaughter by seeking out the Queen Dragon. I struggled initially to think about what makes How to Train Your Dragon 1 great, because its themes are pretty simple, its plot is not too complex, and its characters are pretty simple as well. What I came to realize about the greatness of How to Train Your Dragon is that all this simplicity is wrapped in a perfectly structured movie that benefits every aspect of the story. Hiccup's arc is not about him changing or overcoming a flaw, it's about him simply accepting who he is. He learns to just find his own path, and as a result he's able to change the entire village. And the way this movie is structured, it allows that character development to shine. Hiccup is the biggest reason why this movie is so great, but it's not the only reason. While Hiccup's arc in this movie is specifically about him finding his own place in a world that's so different from him, the entire trilogy as a whole has some pretty strong themes. Themes of challenging societal norms, themes of the importance of finding peace with your enemies, themes of coming together to make you stronger than any individual ever could. Humans and dragons were pitted against each other as mortal enemies, sides that have been fighting each other forever. But through Toothless and Hiccup, we see that the two are pretty much the same. Hiccup and Toothless are the same, they're just a different species. As awesome as Hiccup is, he can't change the world on his own. As awesome as Toothless is, he can't change the world on his own either. They're only able to change the world and defeat the Queen Dragon once they come together. The themes of finding your own path and accepting who you are great themes, don't get me wrong, but they're pretty standard for kids movies. The theme of coming together and the social commentary behind that is something that's unique to this franchise. That message is probably the part of the franchise that I appreciate more than anything else, to be honest. Now, the last part of this movie we need to talk about is the arc of the Vikings and more specifically Stoic. Stoic is such an interesting and three-dimensional character. Since this movie doesn't really have a villain, the Queen Dragon is more of an obstacle rather than an actual character, throughout like 70% of the film, Stoic is the antagonist. It's Stoic's treatment of his son and how he would react to the truth that drives the tension throughout the first 2/3 of the story. So how do you create an antagonist that for most of the story is clearly a bad father but also a good person? I mean, some of the things Stoic says in this movie are some of the worst things you could say to your kid. He says Hiccup needs to change everything about him, he treats his son like an embarrassment, and worst of all, he tells his son he is no son of his. This is terrible parenting. But what the Raiders are able to do is convey effectively that Stoic does want what's best for his son. He's not a mean person to his core. He just struggles to see his son's strengths because they're so different from his strengths. I'm no parent, so I can't say for certain, but I imagine a lot of parents can relate with this struggle. Of course you want to keep challenging your child so they grow into the best version of themselves, but you also want to find their natural gifts and feed into those as well. I think this understanding is why throughout most of the movie, viewers give Stoic the benefit of the doubt. We never excuse the things he says to Hiccup, but we kind of understand them, especially since human history has been rooted in so much intolerance. By the end of the movie, Stoic does change. He learns that he was wrong and he begins to see and understand his son's strengths. I love that this big, strong, masculine Viking goes to his son and admits he was wrong. That is such a great lesson to teach to fathers and men out there. I also really love how the writers took the insults Stoic levied towards Hiccup in the beginning of the movie and turned them into some of the most heartwarming moments of the movie. It was an ongoing gag that Stoic or the others would point to Hiccup and say, "Be less of this." Then Hiccup would be like, "You're pointing to all of me." At the end of the movie, Stoic says we need more of this, and Hiccup is like, "You're pointing to all of me." That was really sweet. I also love when Stoic tells Hiccup he's proud to call Hiccup his son, something that pays off a moment where Stoic said to Hiccup he was no son of his. That's another great moment. Stoic was an excellent character, whether that be as his role as a pseudo-antagonist or through his arc that sends a powerful message to adults. How to Train Your Dragon grossed $494.9 million at the box office. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film scored a 99%, along with a 91% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored an 8.1 out of 10. The first How to Train Your Dragon is a beautiful film. It has deep and complex characters, it has a perfectly structured story, and it has great themes perfect for kids. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a complicated film for me. On one hand, the movie perfectly reinforces the characters and the themes from the first movie, and as a sequel, that's maybe the most important thing you can do, but the way the movie is structured pales in comparison to the first movie. So let's first talk about what the movie does well. I feel like this should be more common, but it's not. I love that How to Train Your Dragon 2 shows our main characters aging and growing up. I feel like a lot of kids movies, they have great themes for kids and whatnot, but the characters themselves aren't kids. They're usually adults or animals or some object like in Toy Story. The only major franchise I can think of that puts such an emphasis on the characters growing up and aging through installments is Harry Potter. So I love that Hiccup is noticeably older in this second movie, and that the message of this film is about what it means to grow up. Hiccup doesn't just look older, but he also has a bunch of new things too. I love that he has his own wings that allows him to glide alongside Toothless. That seems like such a perfect continuation of the character from the first movie. He also has a bloody lightsaber. That's awesome. It tells us that as he ages, he's able to come up with and create newer and cooler things. I love that these movies continue to highlight how creative Hiccup is and how that is a part of growing up as well. Hiccup isn't the only one to grow up, however. Astrid is noticeably more mature. She kind of loses that hot-headed aspect of her character, which I'm not convinced is a good thing, but that's not really important. I do also love how this movie expands the world. We see other tribes and cultures and what their relationship to dragons is like. Just because Burke went through this cultural revolution, that doesn't mean the rest of the world did. So I like that the film explored that. Let's now talk about the plot. So the main plot of this movie is that Hiccup is being groomed to become chief and he's not prepared for it. He has these really nice conversations with Astrid where he expresses that he can't imagine how he can ever be like his father. While he's having this internal battle, he handles the external battle in quite an immature way. Here comes Drago Bloodfist, a man who supposedly cannot be reasoned with and cannot be convinced to love dragons. Hiccup is like, okay, watch me, and then he fails to make any meaningful change in Drago. The message here is that as you grow up, you learn that you can't solve every problem. It doesn't matter how great you are at one thing, you can't be great at everything. Hiccup cannot resolve this situation through his strengths. He has to adapt. In principle, I love this message, but not so much in execution, and I'll get into that in a sec. After his father's death, Hiccup again feels lost. He is now chief and he doesn't know what to do. A part of growing up is that your actions have consequences. When you're young, you can do stupid shit and it doesn't really matter. You'll just get yelled at by your parents. But when you're an adult, there's a lot more things to consider. In the first movie, Hiccup can play with dragons all he wants. The only consequence he faces is being yelled at by his dad. That's the luxury of being a kid. But in the second movie, as an adult, his actions indirectly lead to his dad's death. So even with that, it's a good way to show what happens when you grow up. Eventually, with the help of Astrid and his mother, he's reassured that he's ready, and Hiccup comes to the conclusion that he just needs to try. He may not know how to live up to his father, he just needs to try. The way he ends up winning in the end is very similar to the first movie. Hiccup doesn't defeat Drago because he's stronger than him or because he outfought him. Hiccup wins because he believed in his connection to Toothless. He reached out to Toothless, and their bond saved the day. It's said Toothless was only able to enter this alpha mode because of his connection to Hiccup. So even though Toothless did outfight the Bewilderbeast, it's not framed that way, and that's more important. The movie ends with Hiccup stating that the reason the people of Berk are stronger is not because they have more people or whatnot, it's because they represent something bigger than themselves, and that's their bond with dragons. It's a great speech to end the movie on, a speech that I will repeatedly bring up when we talk about the next movie. I want to talk about the execution of these ideas, however. Let's begin with Drago. I get what they were trying to do with him. Hiccup is someone who believes in change and that everyone is capable of empathy and compassion. So here comes Drago, someone who has no empathy nor compassion. So what's Hiccup going to do? This franchise is all about how anyone is capable of change and how even the most stubborn societies can come together. That is the message of the first movie. To have a villain in movie 2 whose defining characteristic is his inability to change is kind of contradictory to the themes of the franchise, but I don't know if that's fair or not. With Star Wars, a fundamental theme of that franchise is anyone can be redeemed, but then there's Palpatine, a man who's treated as the embodiment of evil who is never given a chance at redemption. So is Palpatine capable of redemption, or is he the archetype of evil that allows other less evil characters a chance at redemption? I'm not sure. So do you guys believe it's a contradiction to have a villain who simply cannot change when change is a crucial theme of your franchise? Let me know in the comments. Besides that, the dangers of having a villain like Drago is that they're pretty one-dimensional. Drago is evil. He doesn't believe in compassion or change. That's his character. There's one scene where they mention dragons burned Drago's home when he was younger, but that is the most shallow of villain motivations you can have. In order to do this type of character effectively, you need to prioritize two things. Since the villain has no depth, they need to be an excellent foil to the main character, and they need to be charismatic enough to hold a scene on their own. The perfect example of this is the Joker. In The Dark Knight, the Joker has no depth nor deeper motivations to him. He is the embodiment of chaos. The reason he works so well as a villain is because he's a perfect foil to Batman, and because he's simply so much fun to watch. Drago is neither of these things. Yes, he and Hiccup have polar opposite worldviews, but that doesn't result in a very engaging character dynamic. They just kind of bicker and then fight. There's no interesting back and forths, there's nothing. So it doesn't work as well. Drago also has no charisma to him at all. He's bland, and all he does is scream like a lunatic. I know I just said that he and Hiccup have opposite philosophies, but that's technically not true. Hiccup learns towards the end that Drago doesn't really have hatred towards dragons, he just wants to use them to conquer the world. So now he's even more one-dimensional than he was before. Honestly, as a whole, I found Drago to be an incredibly weak villain. There was no depth to him, and he was not engaging to watch. Let's move on and talk about Valka, because her role in this movie is peculiar. A good chunk of this movie is devoted to Hiccup rediscovering his mother. I love so many of these scenes. I love that we learn that Hiccup got most of his attributes from his mother. There's something so wholesome about that. Also, the scenes between Valka and Stoic were beautiful. I loved when they were dancing and the camera just cuts to Hiccup and he looks so happy. What I don't love is how easily forgiven Valka was. She can make excuses all she wants about why she left Hiccup, but she did abandon her husband and son. I'm under the implication that even though she was taken away by a dragon, she could have come back if she wanted to. If that's the case, then she abandoned her family. I don't forgive that type of thing as easily as Hiccup, I guess. Now, the real issue with Valka and her storyline is that it's kind of irrelevant. We've discussed what Hiccup's arc is about. It's about him growing up and learning what it means to become an adult. Nothing with Valka reinforces that story at all. It's a complete detour. It feels like the main purpose of having her in the story is to make Stoic's death more tragic, which it definitely does because there was the promise of a family reunion. But besides that, she doesn't help Hiccup defeat Drago. She doesn't motivate Hiccup in any way. That was Astrid. And even before we met her, we didn't know anything about her other than that she was taken away. I think she was mentioned once in the previous movie and once in this movie before she showed up. It's not like Luke Skywalker, who repeatedly wanted to know more about his father before Vader later told him the truth. Considering how tight the script was for the first movie and how great the pacing was, this storyline in movie 2, while wholesome at times, was a bit of a waste. What they might have been going for was how Hiccup was being irresponsible here. I think it makes a lot of sense that the theme of this movie is growing up, and a good chunk of this movie is devoted to Hiccup spending time with his mother rather than fighting the man who's trying to control all the dragons. The script could have really emphasized this point. Hiccup left town to go fight Drago, but got distracted by his mother. And while Hiccup is playing at family with his parents, his friends are out there looking for him and getting captured as a result. To take this one step further, as I mentioned earlier, you could blame Stoic's death on Hiccup. Stoic told Hiccup that Drago couldn't be reasoned with. Valka told Hiccup that Drago couldn't be reasoned with, but Hiccup ignored them and confronted Drago anyway. As a result, Drago was able to take control of Toothless and Stoic died. The big problem here is that the storylines are there, but they're never acknowledged by Hiccup or the script. After Stoic dies, Hiccup has that moment where he tears up because he's afraid he can never live up to his father, but he never acknowledges that what happened was largely his fault. So Hiccup's change stems from the overall fact that his father died, rather than him being at fault for his father's death. And I feel like the second version of this story would have been much more powerful than the current version. I say this in all my videos. Characters must suffer the consequences of their actions and their flaws. Hiccup does suffer the consequences of his actions and his flaws, but he never acknowledges it. And that's something you need to do. If you don't acknowledge your flaw, then you can't learn and grow from it. Of everything I've spoken about, this was my biggest issue with How to Train Your Dragon 2. The story clearly wanted to give Hiccup this arc about growing up, an arc that I love in principle, but it just wasn't executed in the best way that it could be. How to Train Your Dragon 2 grossed $618.9 million at the box office. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film scored a 92% along with a 90% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.8 out of 10. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a fine movie. It still has excellent characters, a brilliant soundtrack, and noticeably better effects compared to the first movie. It's just that when it comes to its story, it doesn't come close to the highs of the first movie. Now, before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 15.7% of viewers are subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. I do not like How to Train Your Dragon 3 at all. It's not a bad movie per se. While the second movie was flawed, it did reinforce the themes of the franchise. The hidden world honestly does nearly everything it can to undermine and contradict the themes of the previous two movies. Let's talk about the positives first. I think there's a lot of value in exploring Hiccup and the rest of the humans becoming too close to their dragons. After the second movie, Toothless is now the alpha, so the rest of the dragons are naturally going to flock to them. With all these new dragons on Berk, it seems like a logical progression of the second movie. The other aspect of this movie I like are the questions it raises. We see there are too many dragons. This results in Hiccup struggling to decide what to do with them all. How is Hiccup going to respond as a leader? I like seeing him struggle with being a leader and making huge decisions like these. There's a really good story to tell in Hiccup learning how to define himself without Toothless around. I really like the moment after Toothless gets captured where Astrid reassures him that everything that made him special existed before Toothless showed up. That his great qualities exist with or without Toothless. Then all the dragon riders go to save Toothless and the Light Fury without their dragons. It was a cool way to show the dragon riders gaining some of their independence back after they became too dependent on them. Also, I think Grimmel was a slightly better villain than Drago. Instead of being a power-hungry tyrant like Drago, he just wants the admiration of being the one who killed all the Night Furies. He's still pretty one-dimensional, but he's definitely more charismatic than Drago. I like how he just rolled up into Hiccup's home and threatened him. I also like how Hiccup didn't try to reason with him like he did with Drago. He learned his lesson from the second movie and saw Grimmel as a threat right away. Everything that's good about this movie is the potential and the questions it raises. What's bad about the movie are all the answers to those questions. Ending the movie with Toothless and all the dragons leaving to go live in the hidden world is a betrayal of the previous two movies. This franchise was built on the idea of challenging preconceived norms. The first movie showed Hiccup challenging everything his culture represented, and he proved that the union of the dragons and humans was greatly beneficial to both sides. The only way the Queen Dragon could have been defeated was by the bond of Hiccup and Toothless. The second movie was all about how people will continue to challenge the union of humans and dragons, but Hiccup was determined to prove that they represented something bigger. I want to read the final lines of the second movie for you guys, just as a reminder. Those who attacked us are relentless and crazy, but those who stopped them, oh, even more so. We may be small in numbers, but we stand for something bigger than anything the world can pit against us. We are the voice of peace, and bit by bit, we will change this world. You see, we have something they don't. Oh sure, they have armies and they have armadas, but we have our dragons. You're telling me the second movie ends with this speech, and then the sequel ends with Hiccup saying the dragons can never find peace with humans in this world, so they all have to go live on the hidden island together? Bit by bit, we will change this world. No, you won't. You're gonna send the dragons away a year later. We stand for something bigger than anything the world can pit against us. And what is that exactly? What is that something bigger? Because later on, a villain who's basically the same as Drago Bloodfist will force you to send all the dragons away. It's just so hard for me to look at any of the positives of this film when the movie contradicts everything I love about the first two movies. I want to talk about one of the most underrated movie trilogies ever made, the Planet of the Apes trilogy. Most specifically the first one, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Spoilers, by the way. In that movie, a man named Will raises a super smart ape named Caesar. Caesar grows up with Will and is shown to be very happy. But as time passes, Caesar begins to realize while Will accepts him, the rest of humanity won't. Caesar is sent to an animal penitentiary where he sees how cruel apes are being treated. He eventually saves all the apes and leads them into the wild. At the end of the movie, Will asks Caesar to go home with him, and Caesar says no. Why was this ending so great? Because the movie did the legwork to establish that even though Will and Caesar loved each other, humans will never accept the apes, and the apes can never forgive the abuse levied towards them. This works. Let's now compare this to How to Train Your Dragon. For two movies, we saw how strong the bond between humans and dragons had become. After fighting each other for generations, Hiccup proved that dragons and humans can not only coexist, but thrive together. They defeated a queen dragon by working together. Toothless was able to overcome the mind control of a bewilderbeast because his love and bond with Hiccup was so strong. Then a dragon girl shows up, and I'm supposed to believe that not only Toothless, but the entire dragon race can only thrive and be happy if they're separated from humans? Nope, I refuse. This movie itself doesn't even set that up. The movie begins and Toothless and Hiccup are shown to be as happy as ever. There is not a single sign of Toothless longing for something more until the Light Fury shows up. Even then, Toothless still seems happy with Hiccup. I'm supposed to believe after hanging out for maybe 5 minutes of screen time, Toothless wanted to run away to the hidden world with the Light Fury and move on from his best friend? That's the implication, right? Because when Toothless ends up saving Hiccup, he doesn't look happy. But Goldman, Toothless was longing for love and now he has it. You're not wrong, but there needs to be a healthy balance. You can gradually show Toothless struggling with this, instead of Toothless bailing on Hiccup the first chance he gets. At the end of the movie, it doesn't really feel like it was even Toothless's decision to leave. It was Hiccup's. After the gang comes back from the hidden world, there's this little moment where Toothless seems really happy that the Light Fury followed him back to the island, because now it seems like they can all live happily together. And then of course Grimmel attacks. So it seems like Toothless could be happy with both Hiccup and the Light Fury in his life. I get the theme of this movie is letting go, and that's a valuable theme to teach. As we get older, there are things from our childhood that we have to let go of. People, places, relationships, many things. But this message only works if you show that not letting these things go has a negative impact on your life. This movie does not show that Toothless is having any negative impact on Hiccup's life. I get that Hiccup has an arc this season of having to rediscover who he is without Toothless, but Hiccup can still learn this without having to send every dragon away to the hidden island. Did Astrid's dragon want want to leave Astrid? Was she more happy with Astrid, or was she forced to leave because Toothless is the alpha and he left? I don't know. I think a version of the story that works much better is if only Toothless and maybe a few other dragons leave, not all of them. Of course, this would need to be developed more. Maybe the movie begins and Hiccup saves a bunch of dragons. Now Berk is overcrowded with dragons and he wants to find the hidden world so these riderless dragons can have a proper home. We can also see that Toothless has grown maybe a little unhappy. There could be some tension between Toothless and Hiccup. But once the Light Fury shows up, Toothless starts to act like himself again. The rest of the movie can kind of play out the same way. In the end, all these riderless dragons can live free and happy on this new island, including the Light Fury. And as Hiccup and the humans are about to leave, Toothless signals to Hiccup that he wants to stay. And after an emotional goodbye, Hiccup agrees. The reason this ending works so much better is that it doesn't undermine the entire trilogy. The issue I have with the ending is more so Hiccup sending all the dragons away rather than Toothless specifically leaving. What the bond between Hiccup and Toothless represented was more important than the bond itself, if that makes sense. If just Toothless and maybe a handful of other dragons decide to leave, then the movie is not saying that humans and dragons can never coexist. It's not saying that humans are evil and dragons can never find peace with them. It's just saying that Toothless alone needs to move on and that Hiccup alone needs to let go. That is a much better story than the one we got. And by doing this version, you can still have the really cutesy ending where Hiccup and Toothless reunite with all their kids, which was a great and emotional scene. But as the movie currently stands, despite the great music and despite the great action and despite the great animation, I just can't like this movie. You cannot betray the values of your franchise. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World grossed $539 million at the box office. Of the 3 How to Train Your Dragon movies, this was the second highest grossing one, with the second movie being the highest grossing of the 3. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film scored a 90% along with an 87% audience score. Of the 3, The Hidden World has the lowest rating, with the first one having the highest rating. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.4 out of 10. And just like with Rotten Tomatoes, the movies are ranked 1, 2, and 3. This would be my ranking of the trilogy, by the way, but I would give 2 and 3 a much lower score. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World was a disappointing movie. Not a bad one, just a disappointing way to end the trilogy. So what do you think about the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy? Do you love all 3 of them? Do you only like 1 or 2 of them? What do you think about my takes on the trilogy? Let me know down below. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.